Morning, and here I am doing a live stream. Been a while since I did one. Wouldn't normally do it this early in the morning, but of course, the developments of June 23rd and June 24th warrant an emergency conversation. So hopefully, people are going to see this on YouTube or on Facebook or wherever here in the morning in the United States. It's very early in the morning on the West Coast. It's 9 a.m. here on the East Coast. What time is it over there in the UK, Sukant?
It is. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy weekend. It's 10 past 14:09 exactly.
Okay, so it's just 1 in the afternoon over there. It's morning here in the US. It's, of course, I guess, early evening in Russia. So we're kind of doing an emergency conversation here. Sukant Chandan is with me. If you don't know Sukant's work, Sukant is my longtime comrade, collaborator, friend. Sukant is an instrumental, dare I say, central activist in London who has done all kinds of work. He's involved with the Malcolm X movement there, MX movement on Twitter. That's what you should be following. And the Malcolm X movement in general in London. Hey, Sukant.
Hey, Eric. Nice to chat to you again. Congratulations on your health. Nice
Thank you.
Nice
Yes.
to see your face. We were shacking out to a little bit of house and garage before. Eric was smiling and dancing, everyone. Sorry to disclose that.
For those of you, yes, for those of you who don't know, friends and enemies alike, I had a cancer diagnosis that was recently given the all clear. So I'm happy about that. So
congratulations to you and your family. Great news.
Thank you. So in any event, Sukant, let's not talk about my health situation or our family situations or any of that stuff. Let's talk about what's going on in Russia. This is crazy, right? So I went to bed last night, kind of not really paying attention to that. I think I was watching a baseball game, recovering, looking at, organizing my books and stuff. And all of a sudden someone says, hey, you should probably check your Telegram. So I start looking at that, and wouldn't you know it, looks like a mutiny, looks like an uprising, looks like something being stirred up with regard to the Wagner mercenary organization, allegedly having been struck by Russian military, allegedly targeted by Russian air power, that has then seemingly emboldened Yevgeny Prigozhin, the oligarch slash, military dictator of this Wagner paramilitary outfit, to more or less declare open war on the Ministry of Defense, which is ultimately war against the Russian state. So at a very basic level, this would look like civil war or the beginnings of a coup d'etat or an attempt at a coup d'etat or something along those lines. So let's just begin there, Sukant. What do you make of this?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I think this is all too predictable considering our line of analysis and the framework that we've been imposing at least since February last year, but on a larger timescale as it pertains to a class analysis, a global class analysis as to the nature of what the Russian leadership and the Russian state is, its relationship to China, to NATO, to the global South, etc. So it's this, I mean, really, we were pointing towards this through much of our analysis for a very long time. And it's obviously high drama, it's history being made right in front of our eyes, but it's just predictable. And it's only not been so predictable when you then enter the very distorted attempts of analysis and identification of phenomena by those who are in what we call the Dugan Racket, this red-brown camp, those trying to spin this whole Russian project, colonial kind of, it's like the PNAC project in Russian garb. Those who are trying to promote this anything than other of what it obviously is. It's been a very toxic kind of capitalist, gangster capitalist, racist project from the get-go. And, Lenin kind of finds an answer to all of this mess over 100 years ago in 1920, when he understands and he puts out in his leadership that bourgeois nationalists cannot complete the tasks of the anti-imperialist global challenge. Actually, they will fail in that. And under the influence of M. N. Roy and others at the Comintern and at the Baku Congress in particular, correctly then concludes and adopts the position of revolutionaries against colonialism and in the personification of M. N. Roy, that actually it's the revolutionary forces. So applying that analysis today, then you can you can have tools to understand what this phenomenon is, but because people have been refusing to identify what this is and then spinning it as somehow more positive or functional or in the interests of the global anti-imperialist struggle, you've got this whole racket, diverse community of distortion and grift that's really befuddled some people's minds. And it's just a shame that therefore it remains those more sober, real bourgeois analysts from the West who can actually give some answers to this much more than those that are posturing within that whole Dugan red-brown racket. So it's no surprise to us. It's a long time coming. We were tracking this whole thing definitely since the Wagner intervention in Bakhmut. But it's also Wagner and the Russian state's relationship through, in their projects in the Middle East and Africa has to also factor in this, but I think we're going to dig deeper through the conversation. Sorry, there was someone who was listening in who was expressing appreciation for Patricia. Thank you, and greetings to Patricia. Yeah, we'll go deeper into this. So Eric, what's your thoughts immediately?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. I wasn't even expecting to go into all of the sort of the red, brown and the grifting and all of that just yet, although of course that's central to all of this. I mean, just from the perspective of the developments, I mean, this is pretty amazing. We have in our lifetime gone through the collapse of the Soviet Union, so it's not inconceivable that you could see the collapse of the Russian state. This is something that many pro-Ukrainian voices have been predicting, both left-wing and right-wing ones have been predicting this for quite a long time now, really since the beginning of the war, that ultimately this was sort of the logical conclusion of how this would all end. I don't know that I admit, I don't know that I ever went that far, because it was unclear to me just the extent to which the Russian state could continue to perpetuate this using its military industrial complex, its reserves of human cannon fodder and so forth. So I can't say that I take credit for having correctly predicted that it would go like this, but I definitely did say that, number one, once it became clear around Bakhmut that Wagner was getting, to use a horrible cliche, a little too big for its britches, that it became clear that there was a conflict there and that the conflict was real, right? That there was certainly a desire on the part of Prigozhin to kind of supersede the Ministry of Defense, which of course creates a certain obvious conflict. For me, it wasn't clear then, and it is clear, of course, now, the extent to which Putin either was egging it on, was able to control the sort of divides that were emerging, was using one against the other, sort of a good cop, bad cop type play, right? Basic mafioso sort of gangster tactics, right? Mob boss tactics, playing your underlings against each other. It's something that Putin has done for a long time. But now that we're into what is clearly an escalation here, this is open rebellion, clearly and unmistakably. So that then I think raises several other questions. Can Russia continue to sustain a military effort in Ukraine and in Donbass while this is ongoing? And I guess related to that, what does the inward turn of Prigozhin and Wagner mean for Russia's capability to sustain any of this moving forward? I mean, that to me is unclear. It is clear that Russia tried to apply certain legal frameworks in places like Donbass that it now considers part of the quote unquote Russian Federation. That was a big problem, I think, for Wagner. I don't think that Wagner felt bound by the laws of Russian society or anything, really. I think they felt bound by conviction and duty to Prigozhin and to their paychecks. And I think this is one of the major conflicts here as well. I think they wanted to continue operating outside, not only outside of the authority of the military, but outside of any legal authorities as well. And I think that is a big part of this too. But ultimately, and I want to get your thoughts on this, I see this as a tremendous blunder by Prigozhin. I mean, if Prigozhin really felt that he could do this and pull this off now, it would have already been done Putin would have already been deposed. You wouldn't have this dramatic marching to Moscow and all of this other stuff. So I don't know if this is for show, if this is extraordinary hubris on the part of Prigozhin, or what this means. But I do know that it's an extreme crisis in Russia. They would not be deploying military onto the streets of Moscow if they didn't think so.
Yeah, no, interesting stuff, Eric. I think this situation, as it's been unfolding, points to the way in which the Russian military and the Russian state is just not fit for purpose for their military operation in Ukraine. Prigozhin and the Wagner PMC and its deployment in Ukraine is indicative of how unfit for purpose the Russian formal armed forces are for the military operation. And considering that Putin has no other option but to deploy Wagner into Ukraine, despite some of the tensions that you're saying in relation to Prigozhin and Wagner and the other Russian state institutions. And then that all, I think, then retrospectively informs our analysis that, like in our conversation that we've been having, Eric, throughout this Ukraine war, you have been identifying, and correctly so, that the Russian military does have capacity, a lot of capacity to draw upon to deploy into Ukraine. But a capacity to throw untrained young men into a war zone does not equal strategic gains militarily in the battlefield and politically. And that's where Wagner was so important of an entry point for Putin's own pursuit of his strategic objectives in Ukraine. Now, both these two things have been chafing and now are just openly falling out with each other. In terms of, so I think it's all of that is to say just simply that it was very clear from the first weeks of the Russian endeavor into Ukraine last February that, well, even before they entered it, Putin's second guessing of himself, his own sense of insecurity and lack of confidence, his own lack of, excuse the expression, but lack of balls going into Ukraine. He did not give leadership, actually. If you kind of look at his political behavior and his attempt at leadership, it just does not give confidence to his followers in his project. I'm not trying to spin Saddam Hussein as some great leader and all of this stuff, but you can see other leaders in modern history who in extremely pressured situations and literally against all odds, fought bravely to the absolute end of their lives in a project that was also dysfunctional, whatever, but they showed a confidence, they showed a leadership right to the end. And Putin hasn't been doing that at all. So Prigozhin, throughout all of this developing crises in relation to Ukraine, has been playing the more ballsy guy, the more ballsy leader, to the increasingly emasculated leadership of Vladimir Putin.
Well, and to that point, Sukant, that's how many Russians are going to view this situation today, because again, they may see this as mutiny, they may see this as treason, as rebellion, but they can also look at a map. So here's a look at a map that was up to date as of supposedly an hour ago, showing Wagner's progress. That little yellow circle at the top is Moscow. And that red circle and all of that red territory is where Wagner is currently. So clearly what we can see here is some serious balls. I mean, a march to Moscow at this time, it's ballsy. It's from Putin's right, from a sociopathic degenerate of the first order, but it's still a ballsy move.
Yeah, but I think also indicates just the absolute, just toxic car crash, which is the Putin project all along. It's just, when you privatize and subcontract your military, you ultimately get what you pay for. Yeah, I know, and that notion has been going around on social media, and of course, there's truth in that. It's a PMC. A PMC is it's Prigozhin's little empire. But however, Prigozhin and Putin have been very, very close. But stressful situations tests the comradeship of any friendship and comradely kind of alliance, and very much so. If you see the kind of the debates in the Russian media and in the Russian political leadership, the way like Dugin has been kind of playing the kind of more philosophical kind of manifestation of Prigozhin's narrative against Putin. Putin seems to be there seems to be a near consensus of those supporting the military operation in Ukraine that Putin just hasn't been up to the job. He hasn't proven any in Russia itself. Now, outside with the Red Brown Racket, of course, they're going to constantly whitewash Putin, etc.
Oh, he's ushering in the multipolar world, Sukant.
Exactly, yes, and we're moving away from the dollar economy, all that nonsense. It's just such rubbish. But they have to employ such pathetic and such shallow false analysis, because the thing is just so broken as it is. The thing is so unethical, it's so broken, it's so toxic, and then you're left. These guys are left because they're getting the grift, obviously, from the Russian camp. So they're literally paid to manipulate. Then you're left with just the most ridiculous kind of posturing analysis that makes no sense. But going back to this, I mean, this was always going to be the car crash that it was. And there's so many eggs on faces right now,
Yes.
and
lots of eggs to go around.
And oh, bro, God bless the chickens, producing these eggs. That's just, just. It's just, I don't know.
They've certainly come home to roost. There's no doubt about that.
All kinds of metaphors here. Yeah. But anyway, but it's how can a unjust project contribute to a just outcome? It's impossible, right? So I think it was just an inevitability that this was going to happen. You've got an unjust war. You've got an increasingly oppressed and immiserated population in the Russian Empire, which is the Russian Federation. Demoralization, social malaise, depression, alienation, all over it. The most exciting thing happening in Russia is the bloody Ukraine war. So add in another whole, massive dimension of toxicity into your society. The way that just kind of degrades and demoralizes and degenerates the body politic of Russian society. And then on the edge, you've got all these lefties trying to promote this as a great liberating global project.
Well, that's just it. That's just it. They don't, for the most part, right? So they dance that line that you and I have been trying to expose for years and years now, where they acknowledge the sort of rapacious gangster capitalism that Russia actually represents. Except for maybe the most deranged among them, none of them really promote Russia from a left perspective as a socialist project or anything representing socialism. Instead, it's at the purely sort of one-dimensional level of kind of opposition to the United States in order to usher in a post-unipolar world, which they call multipolarity or BRICS or de-dollarization or all of the other buzzwords that they like to associate with all these things. But none of them is backed up by anything concrete, by anything material, right? It's interesting because, and I'm going to segue part of this conversation since we're limited on time this morning. Sukant, if you're available, maybe we could regroup later tonight and do another one of these because I have to take my car to the mechanic actually. But but I wanted to talk this morning if I could. To me, one of the interesting aspects of this is the fact that you have a global far right project that is objectively, this is not opinion, this is not just a subjective, observation, objectively the center of the global fascist movement, right? In the form of money disbursement, right? We know this is documented, of course, the money that went to Marine Le Pen, the money that went to Salvini and the Lega Nord, which became the League, which now is basically in a power sharing arrangement with Meloni and the brothers, which are Italian fascists, right? So Italian fascism, French fascism, Dutch fascism with Geert Wilders and all of the other Brexiteers in Britain and all of these others, right? This was all and I'm not even mentioning, of course, Orban and Bannon and Trump and all of these figures and Bolsonaro and the rest of this, right? Russia is not the puppeteer that controls all of these things, but was an enabler, a facilitator, one that helped to create and to foster these political connections that are now fully formed, that now are sort of authentic in and of themselves, right? So part of the reason why focusing on Russia, paying attention to Russia, and understanding the moves that Russia was making is actually really about also understanding the global far right, which is one of the central struggles for our movements and our peoples today globally.
Yeah, I concur with everything you've said. So these, the posturing grifters to the left trying to push the whole, Russian toxic project. What's their contribution? Their contribution is in line to everything that you just outlined. Because in terms of the radical left, there's been no positive, constructive outcome being attached to this camp.
Nothing.
We disembarked 8 years ago, openly and explicitly because of what we saw, what was coming. It's one thing to attach yourself to Serbian nationalism in the late 90s, right? Or these kind of toxic right-wing nationalisms that are colliding with NATO interests. It's one thing doing that.
For context, Sukant is referring to left-wingers aligning with the far right on the issue of Kosovo, Serbia, and NATO's bombardment that in the late 90s, which was obviously a very different context.
With far-right Serbian nationalists in London against NATO in London.
Noam Chomsky was involved in genocide denial. I mean, Counterpunch published tons of that shit. I mean, come on.
Well, listen, I have to be honest. As my comrade George Chirac says, there's no guarantees in politics. As Amil Cabral says, claim no easy victories, and tell no lies, claim no easy victories. You have to be honest about these things. It's one thing in that period in the late 90s where this whole global far right racket didn't really have the mass appeal as it does now in the post 2014, 15, 16 period. And then when I saw, and then kind of discussing with you at the time, circa 2015, 2016, then we were like, look, this whole thing is coming back to haunt our very communities, right? This whole kind of global project of far-right collusion between Western far-right and Eastern far-right, they're fusing together very openly, as you partly outlined in your comment just previously, and it's impacting my family and my children and my life and my neighbors. So now it's not a faraway thing that is in some kind of global resistance of Axis against NATO. It's not that anymore. It became something different post the Libya war and through the Libya and Syria war. So that's their historic contribution for the last decade, is to help the Tommy Robinsons, the Nigel Farages, the Rees-Moggs in the British context, and their equivalents in every state in the Western states, and going into the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. We've discussed a lot how the Dugan Project has deposited a Zionist victories in pushing the Syrian state and the Iranian state into this whole mess in the Middle East. And one thing a lot of these grifters attached to this toxic far-right project of Dugan and Putin, right? So like Redfish, for example, now RedTube, and Rania Khalek and Vijay Prashad, etc. Some of these individuals, prominent individuals particularly, these people think and they feel like they're promoting a radical anti-imperialist communism through the advocacy, through the prism, and through the red-brown racket. But if you're not deposited at the grassroots globally and where you are, if you're not helping the grassroots to fight racism and to resist, but you're posturing on social media as a leftist, but your political economy is attached to the far right, then you are a total piece of shit. I'm sorry. Yes. You're a total piece of shit. There's people suffering at the grassroots in Mali, in Equatorial Guinea, across Africa in terms of Wagner, etc. There's communities in the West that are suffering under far-right governments, etc. So if you're not actually committed to the grassroots with these people in the global South and in the West fighting back racism, but you're posturing online on social media and catching your red-brown check, just go to hell. Go Absolutely. To hell. And I'm so happy to see that the source of your grift in terms of the Moscow source of funding is soon going to come to an end. And it's maybe for you times for these people to consider making public self-critiques and apologies, jumping out of that racket and actually becoming something useful to the oppressed. I don't think they're going to do that because they have no shame. They have no ability to self-critique and to be honest and transparent and to be held accountable for the grassroots. And that being the case, fire up your backsides, you know?
Yeah. We got a question from our pal Tavish. So here's Tavish.
Yes, Tavish. Do you think there's any chance of Prigozhin succeeding?
Do you think there's any chance of Prigozhin succeeding? What do you think, Sukant?
I think he succeeded in many ways already. You know, Prigozhin, you know, I think he's a total scumbag. You know, I have no sympathy for the guy whatsoever. I think he's absolutely disgusting. But, you know, he's very much a product of the politics that we're talking about. Very, very much so, and very much a product of the Russian state ruling class that we've been analyzing as well. Someone who has no compunction to use literally the laid out dead bodies of young Russian working class men to posture in his own narcissistic, egotistical, crazy agenda. But that's reflective, isn't it? Reflective of the entire Russian political class anyway, from the head of RT to Shoigu, to Lavrov, to Putin. All of these people, they're all very similar in their approach, right? But the only difference is he's got a military power that he's in control of. So where he is succeeding, he's become a cause célèbre for that toxicity, especially in Africa, right? And it's interesting, you know, we have to, I mean, perhaps we can, there's so much to talk about here, Eric. There's so much to go into here. So when it comes to the Russian deployment strategically across Africa, although the pro-Russian demonstrations are holding the Putin flag, it's Prigozhin who's delivering that Russian influence throughout Africa. That's a success for Prigozhin.
And just to add to that point, it is not only the hoisting of the Russian flag for propaganda purposes, it's the extraction of gold and other very important minerals. Yeah, well, but the point is that I don't think people are really appreciating how important that's been to buoying the Russian economy amidst the sanctions war. Because the sanctions, see, the idea that Russia is withstanding the sanctions on its own, and, you know, without doing all of these other dirty things around the world is nonsense. Part of the way that they've withstood this is by extracting hundreds of billions of, I shouldn't say hundreds of billions because I don't know the amount, but some untold billions in gold, in other precious minerals, rare earth minerals, other things that they're extracting. We know that that's happening in Mali. It was reported that the Wagner is in control of one of the key mines on the Mali border with, I think, the Ghana-Mali border. We know that the same thing is happening in Central African Republic. It's happening in Guinea. It's happening in all of these places. So Wagner is not only a means for Russian propaganda in places like Africa. Wagner is a material support to the Russian state that clearly is now in jeopardy.
Absolutely. And exactly that. Listen, Putin has constructed his own multifaceted imprisonment politically. You know, he has no options. Every option and you could see this from before him initiating the military operation in Ukraine. He was second guessing himself. He had no confidence himself. He didn't know what on earth to do with all of this. But he has constructed his own demise. He constructed through, especially the Syria intervention, the racist, neo-colonial, neocon, openly anti-Muslim, anti-migrant war of intervention in Syria. Through that, he constructed himself as the bare-chested, horseback riding, I am the liberator for the entire world against Western interests and for Russian interests. He constructed that for himself. Now, he hasn't got the tools to then deliver that when it comes to the real battle. Well, it's not even a real battle, is it, really? I mean, he's not in a full confrontation with NATO. This is still a proxy. You know, Ukraine is still a proxy endeavor for NATO. It's not full frontal. And very soon after the intervention in Ukraine, everyone knew, to quote a few comrades who had some sympathy with Putin, oh, clearly his military is a bit shit, isn't it? You know?
Yes. I mean, I love the armchair generals after the fact. Yeah.
Well, yeah, absolutely, and that criticism is absolutely valid in this regard. His military is a bit shit. Well, he's a bitch. He's just a bitch. Shit.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Just carpet bombing poor Muslims in Syria, and claiming that as a victory.
Or Chechnya.
Or yeah, of course. You just carpet bomb just whole villages in Chechnya and towns. Okay, congratulations. But then when NATO are still on a low level supplying Kiev with something,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Putin didn't know how to deal with that. Was it every 2 weeks he threatened a nuclear response?
Yeah,
right?
and NATO's involvement from the perspective of what NATO could be doing is minimal, really. I mean, you don't even have NATO boots on the ground. You probably have, intelligence operatives, military intelligence types, trainers who are there working with the Ukrainians, helping with intelligence, spotting targets, whatever they might be doing. But I mean, that's still pretty minimal as far as what NATO and the United States could be doing, the weapons they could be supplying, what they could be doing. And Russia, I mean, can't even withstand this. Now we could go on and on just about that, but there's more comments, and we have
just to go back to Tavish's thing.
All right, quickly, because Tavish has another comment.
Yeah, Prigozhin succeeding. Yes, he's succeeding in the toxicity and the collapse ongoingly of the Russian body politic. So within that context, so there's no success in terms of attaining the Russian state for Prigozhin, but in the context of a collapsing body politics and the toxicity of it all, Prigozhin is proving himself to being the man of the hour, the man with confidence, the man with the plan, the man who can attract, who can actually be a pole of attraction and leadership. So in that narrow framework, he's succeeding, but then he's being spun as some kind of pro-NATO, NATO-supported color revolution by the Red Brown Racket. So what potentially could have been an opportunity for the Red Browners to posture as strong and as muscle men, well, they've thrown that away because they're all at the feet of Daddy Putin, because the money might run out at any second now, right? Because that's what it's about. The anxiety is one about a political embarrassment that we've attached ourselves to a project that so obviously is collapsing in on itself, and secondarily, oh shit, Red Stream and Saka and all of this stuff. Oh shit, our funding is going to run out at any moment, because the decision is going to be made any moment, Eric. Right, when these guys say, oh shit, now we're in a total crisis, is it worth carrying on with these stupid platforms? No, it's bloody not, because Putin is now fighting for his life, and his leadership is fighting for their lives now. Right.
So to those points, Sukant, there's several comments that I want to run through here before we have to end it for at least for right now.
Oh.
So well, soon, because it's 9:40 in the morning, and we have things we have to do here. But a friend of mine, Ari Paul, who, if you don't know him, Ari is a great guy on social media. You should follow him. Ari Paul is with Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, FAIR, based in New York. Here's what he just messaged me. I'm assuming Ari is watching our live stream. He says, quote, "A friend of mine put it this way: the situation in Russia is going to clarify who's a tanky and who is Moscow gold. Side with Wagner, and it means you believe Putinism is getting in the way of the glorious fight against NATO. Side with Moscow, and you're just admitting you're an errand runner for Putin." And he's right. That's exactly what you just said. Exactly the point you just made, Sukant, is that this is a clarifying moment among many that has happened since Ukraine, since the invasion of Ukraine. I think it's very important because the way that people, quote unquote, lefties align around what's happening here is going to be instructive. Now, of course, they can say whatever they want about Ukraine and NATO and CIA and all of that, but the words and the positions that they take now will reveal pretty much all of it. Right now, couple of more things that I want to talk about, but I want to give a quick comment here. This one, Putin is, quote, fleeing to St. Petersburg. I haven't heard that. I saw, I think it was Dmitry Peskov, who's the official spokesperson, say that Putin and Medvedev and all of the rest of them are working away in the Kremlin, business as usual.
Deep in the bunker. Deep in the secret bunkers.
That's the official statement. I don't know if anybody's actually reporting.
Mate, if I was Putin, I'll be legging it somewhere.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. If there's actual reporting that he's fleeing to St. Petersburg, I haven't seen that. But that being said, I could perfectly well believe it, given what's happening, given how unreliable Russia's military is. So that absolutely could be happening. But then again, I want to caution people about speculating on these things, because if you recall, in the early days of this war, man, people were saying Putin is sick. Putin must have some kind of cancer or COVID, or, and they were saying he's going to die. Look at his hands trembling. Look at his eye twitching. Look at this. Look at that. Right. Everyone's always trying to read in to his body language or to this and that, right? And I kind of do shy away from that, because I don't think that any of us can really know for certain. But like I said, it wouldn't be surprising given the situation. And again, I'll just bring it up. I'll just bring it up again here real quick. I mean, look at that map. I mean, we're talking about
Look at the map.
pretty close to Moscow, right? I mean, assuming that that's really the case. So, I can absolutely see it. I don't know. I don't have any specific information to that effect, but it may be so.
Yeah, but Putin's health speculations aside, look at the political health of the project. It's been just becoming more ill and cancerous and just horrific. It just collapsed week by week by week. And we've tried to track it, especially you much more than me, done an excellent job, Eric. Well done. We just tracked the disintegration. And so absolutely now is an opening where, where of course NATO is going to take its advantage. I don't think they're going to go in formally. They don't need to.
No, no.
But Prigozhin's done that. I have to also say, if I was in the Russian camp, and I'm not.
Well, that's clear.
But if I was, I would be backing Prigozhin, who has actually led the sacrifice strategically and effectively in pushing the Russian project into Ukraine, the Middle East, and Africa. It's been Prigozhin. So it's quite pathetic, and it speaks to the patheticness of those who are trying to now spin Prigozhin as some kind of the vanguard of the Western liberal trans agenda. How rude and pathetic of you. You got no ability to appreciate even people in your own camp who have led your own project, and you're that fickle, and your politics is that fickle and brittle that you're just going to chuck Prigozhin away like that. I think it speaks to how just disgusting and ridiculous that whole campaign. That guy Prigozhin, he's a toxic total POS for me, but for you guys, he's been the only functional leadership that you've actually had.
Yeah. What happened to the glorious war against NATO, the glorious struggle against Western imperialism? The vanguard of the revolution was the invasion of Ukraine, right? And what happened? The only guy who can achieve any of the glory of the invasion of Ukraine is this scum who now turns around and invades Russia.
They've all flitted immediately into being, down at the feet of Daddy Putin regards to this. Daddy Putin is about to go at any second now.
Yeah, you better find another gravy train. All right, so Tavish got another comment here. Tavish, I agree with this 100%. This is what I've been talking about for a long time. Boris Kagarlitsky was on my podcast back in September of last year. He said the same thing, that one of the primary reasons for the invasion of Ukraine, NATO was part of it, part of the calculations, but probably really a secondary piece, that the primary piece was about the accumulation of capital by Russian oligarchs, and then, the classical sort of need to export that capital and accumulate further capital in competition with other capitalist forces. And obviously competition in Ukraine, and as Tavish is pointing out correctly, competition in Central Asia. That's competition from China, but even more so maybe competition from Turkey. Additionally, of course, you had Western oil companies, Western financiers involved in Kazakhstan and other places like that. So to Tavish's point, to the point that we've been making for a long time here, Sukant, really since the very beginning, actual real reason is this sort of economic competition, sort of game of strategic position and so forth. And it's clear, it's clear just from anybody looking at the headlines, that Putin is losing, and losing very, very badly.
Yeah, in terms of I agree with everything that you've said, and thank you, Tavish. I think, in terms of going into, there is a multipolar world emerging, and there was a multipolar world emerging, which then produced the First World War and then the Second World War.
Right.
And similarly to that, yes, these are new capitalist emerging global forces that are absolutely vested in right-wing politics, right? It's a right-wing capitalist new poles in competition with the established monopolies of Western states in the world. You have to be very clear with this because it's being befuddled and distorted, both by Western politics, but also by the red-brown camp. I don't know if we're going to have time now to talk about the Chinese dynamic in this, but perhaps later.
We are running out of time. I want to just show, I mean, just a couple of these. I mean, look at, I mean.
Это пипец. Летит очень низко. Только что был взрыв. Мама! Мама! Неосторожно! Мама! Пиздец, мама! Мамочки!
So that's a video clip of in the city of Voronezh, I believe, and that is, I believe it's a video of the same incident that's been shot from several angles, where you had Russian military helicopters being attacked by Wagner forces on the ground, or I should say Wagner anti-aircraft systems that were on the ground. Obviously, there's not really much to say about the terror. You can hear it in her voice. It is extremely scary. If you've ever been in a war zone, if you've ever seen anything like that, it is extremely scary. My only one experience in my actual life of seeing that was seeing the attempted coup in 1993 in Russia. I watched tanks roll up and start firing on the parliamentary building. I watched the fire burning in the parliamentary building. I watched all of that, and that was pretty scary. And I was, safely tucked away behind, behind glass in a hotel watching it, So in any event, I have sympathy, of course, for anybody who's caught in those situations, and certainly whoever that young woman is who's crying out for her mother is not invading Ukraine herself. But thinking about it from the broader political context, what does this tell us about society in Russia? Russian society, which has for the most part, I wouldn't say been entirely apathetic, but hasn't been invigorated with a kind of mainstream anti-war sentiment, despite repression and all of those other things. If anything, the war has more or less maintained a fairly steady approval rating between like 55 and 70%. So is this going to make a dent in Russian political, Russian public opinion? Is this going to change the kind of discussion that exists in Russia? I don't know if it will, but when you watch videos like that, it certainly raises a question.
Yeah, sympathies
for the war coming home. I mean, come on.
Yeah, all of that. Putin has no options here. Every option is another just disastrous collapse into further crises for him. What's going to happen with his endeavor in Ukraine? I don't think this is going to go away. The internal emerging civil war. Can you believe what we're saying? Just listen to ourselves. It's like, oh, okay, we're here already. We were predicting this for a long time, Eric.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, just to reference our previous conversation, but as I'm talking to you, I'm like, we were saying this is going to happen. We were saying this is going to happen. So obviously, what can Putin do? Slam Prigozhin? Oh, good luck with that. That's going to increase all the kind of crises. Well, ally with Prigozhin and try and that's not going to work. I mean, I don't see anything like that can. There's no positive outcomes here for Putin. Also, then the deployment of Russian interests through the Middle East and Africa, the way that's immediately being impacted now through this, that's going to be degraded as well. So there's.
I wouldn't want to be somebody who sided with the junta in Mali. I wouldn't want to be. I wouldn't want to be someone who sided with Wagner. With these military governments that Wagner's been propping up in Central African Republic, in Mali.
Well, we just weeks ago we were saying, look, it's going to come to an end.
Oh yeah.
The military junta's alliance with Wagner and the Russian state propping up these horrific military juntas across Africa is only going to be a short timetable in its existence. Going into the internal Russian situation in terms of I don't know what's going to emerge, but often, as we can see in Khartoum, when a military breaks out amongst anti-people factions and forces, it squeezes out the potential of the people unless they're very organized and there's a disciplined mass movement that can strategically contend in capacity to this whole situation. That's not the situation in Russia. I think the Russian people are just going to continue to be squeezed out of the situation. and what's going to happen. So yeah, can you speculate on the outcomes as we're doing
Yeah,
right now?
I posted that since you were already doing it. Go ahead, Sukant.
Yeah. So I think it's unfortunately, I'd say this with no pleasure whatsoever, because there's a lot of oppressed people in Russia who deserve much better, including the young girl or woman screaming out for her mum in that clip, especially the oppressed Muslim masses, especially the oppressed native communities, especially the Far East Asians and the Central Asian people and the Muslims, the Turkic people as well, who are all oppressed in this whole context. They all deserve an anti-colonial socialist republic that was started by Lenin. That was Lenin's project, which then got turned inside out in many ways by the leadership post-Lenin, which then Putin says his military operation in Ukraine is to kind of historically neutralize Lenin and the Bolsheviks' contribution to the politics of Russia and Ukraine. So yeah, and I think we're going to see more violent toxicity just emerge out of this, because that's just the nature of the Russian state and politics and faction fights and where it's all going. It's very sad, but through all of this, can we? Well, obviously, the attached toxic politics globally is going to degrade, is kind of exposing itself. It has been through the Ukraine conflict from February last year. Can anything particularly great emerge? I think then we have to analyze China in this dynamic as well to explore that question and that challenge.
Absolutely. We're basically out of time, but I do think it's important to note, as you were just alluding to, by the way, if you're watching, I think Sukant, if you're available, maybe we'll do another one in a few hours later this evening, if possible. If not, maybe I'll do one on my own, or maybe we can get somebody else. We'll see. But there's so much more to say. I wanted us to get on here very quickly this morning and talk about it while everything is still ongoing, because who knows, by this evening, things could be very, very different. But since you mentioned China and we have like 5 minutes left, boy, this is really, speaking of things that you and I have been talking about and have been correct about, this is really exactly what we said would happen to China, that China made its bed with the Russians and blundered as badly as the Russians did. When Xi Jinping came out and publicly stood shoulder to shoulder with Putin and said that their, whatever, everlasting friendship or special relationship or whatever the hell they called it, right, that this was the central pillar of Xi Jinping's foreign policy. What a disastrous blunder. Before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, China was central to key aspects of the global economy, of global supply chains, of microprocessors and computer chips and all of these critical, critical commodities that are part of modern capitalism. China was central to all of this. And now, especially since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, China has found itself on the outside looking in. Both the United States and the Europeans have now cut the Chinese out. They're now looking to develop domestically what they previously relied on China for. So in many ways, you could make the argument that China's blundered almost as badly as Russia has.
Yeah, we need more time to go into this subject. I mean, what can I say about China? I got this mixed political emotions when it comes to China in regards to everything and what you just shared. On the one hand, they're kind of, I feel a bit sympathetically embarrassed for them, because, as you've indicated somewhat, the outcomes have been so disastrous for the Chinese projects. On the other hand, I'm just like, well, you bloody deserve it to some extent, because you've just been so foolish in the decisions that you've made. I mean, I don't know. We need more time to really have a more meandering conversation about the Chinese dynamic to all of this. But yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you've said. But I just kind of peel off any sympathy from the Chinese, because they're not providing anything healthier as a counter alternative, and instead folded in with Russia in this horrific military endeavor and the horrific politics that's come out of all of it. But maybe that's a good thing in a way, because then people know, well, this is what really China is all about. It's, there's nothing actually particularly beneficial to be gained out of it. It's better to see a phenomenon for what it is than pretend. Maybe I'm speaking to myself and reflecting on my own journey in this regards, partially as well. But yeah, what a disaster! What a historic disaster! The Chinese leadership, for all our differences with it, was quite steady and stable. relatively quite, maybe wise is not the right word to use.
Measured,
Yeah,
always measured.
Yeah, it was measured, was cautious but strategic. And then when Putin does this, they just collapse into like, oh, we're going to support this. He's our eternal friend. Oh, like, what are you doing,
They
guys?
thought they could use Putin as a battering ram towards a more China-centric future. And that is, of course, the most misguided, dumbest possible analysis of the current situation and of the situation as it existed 18 months ago. The fact that the Chinese could have ever gone for something like this, which they did, by the way, they went for it. It's not like China just stood on the outside or whatever. They went for it. It would not have happened without China's tacit, if not overt, kind of nod to Putin, right? Because of course Putin knows that Putin knew at the outset that if China wasn't at least tacitly on board and wasn't going to provide raw materials and commodities and all those other things, then Putin couldn't really wage this war, right? So in many ways, they not only attached themselves to Putin, but really allowed for this situation to occur.
I think exactly. My prediction is that Chinese and all the other states and leaderships that have been posturing like they got Putin's back, South Africa, Ramaphosa, and all of these people will start now to quickly start distancing themselves from the Russian leadership because the project is over. Yep. It's just done, and they're going to be shifting now. But what a foolishness of the highest order to kind of put yourselves into that, and you can't just extricate yourself out of that so easily now.
Nope.
You've really messed yourselves up, and the Chinese behavior has been the biggest example of that, of much like Putin himself has done, just self-entrapment, constant self-entrapment. I mean, how can you be so foolish in regards to this? Now, the Russian state and experience they're not victims like Iraq. They're not victims like the Palestinians and the Afghans and the Libyans. They're not some oppressed small nation having to, fight back and garner our sympathy in so doing. It's a superpower state. It has options and it's decided on this course of action, which has been disastrous. The Chinese similarly are a superpower state. I mean, there's nuances and differences, but they've also chosen to go into this. So what sympathy can one have? Our loyalty is to the global oppressed and oppressed nations fighting back Western domination and global capitalist domination. That's our loyalty. That's our framework. In that regards, I have to salute the Palestinians. I mean, you know what's going on in the occupied West Bank right now. Incredible resistance, incredible steadfastness of the Palestinians. That's a struggle to support. That's a politics to support. And that's a struggle to support and not try and kind of leverage the Russians and the Chinese into the struggle of the Palestinians like so many people are doing, not least, historic Eurocentric liberals like Ali Abu Nima, for example, who's jumped into the Russian camp. I mean, oh my goodness, what is all of this nonsense,
Oh, well, yeah, absolutely. Sukant, there's so many more people to talk shit about, but we are running out of time. We are out of time, in fact. I would love to sit here and talk shit about many more people and name their names and talk through all of this stuff, but we're out of time. It's 10 o'clock in the morning. I got to run. Sukant, maybe we can get back later this evening. If you're watching us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, wherever you might be watching it, I don't know what to tell you. Keep an eye on your notifications because there may be another live conversation in several hours from now. I will be doing my best to get on, do another live here very soon. And I guess keep an eye on your Telegram channels and Twitter and everything else because things are moving very quickly. Malcolm X Movement on Twitter, MX Movement is what you need to be following. I'm on Twitter at Stop Imperialism, of course, Counterpunch Radio. And of course, I've been putting that ticker there at the bottom of the screen, patreon.com/Eric Draitser. I have subscriber-only content there, videos, interviews, actually a subscriber-only video with Ilya Budraitskis, one of the most important left-wing thinkers and speakers from Russia, all about the left in Russia, what the left has been, where it's going, etc. So go over to the Patreon and check that out. Subscribe to Counterpunch Radio, subscribe to Counterpunch, follow MXM. We'll talk again soon. Thanks, Sukant.
Thank you, Eric.